The first thing you should know is that I'm a coward. And I knew it about myself a long time before any of this. Which is maybe why I survived when the braver people didn't. I want that on the table at the start. Because the rest of this is a story about a man who could have helped and mostly didn't. And I'd rather you understand that going in than feel betrayed by it later. In the winter, I'm talking about I was a junior claims adjuster for a regional insurance outfit. The kind that handles auto and home and a little commercial. Nothing glamorous. I'd been there about 2 years. The work was exactly as dull as you'd imagine. And I want to be clear that I'm not setting up a story about a haunted office. Because the office wasn't haunted. The office was just an office. Beige carpet and humming fluorescents, and a break room with a microwave that smelled permanently of somebody's burnt popcorn from a year before I started. The horror, when it came, didn't come from the building. It came through it, which is different and worse, and took me a long time to understand. What I did all day was process claims. Somebody's car got hit. Somebody's basement flooded. Somebody's kid put a baseball through a neighbor's window. And the file came to my desk, and I'd verify the details, check the policy, assign a value, and route it along. It came to me electronically, mostly, through a system we called the queue, which was just a glorified inbox that fed each adjuster a steady drip of files weighted by our seniority and specialty. Junior guys like me got the small stuff. The big losses, the house fires and the fatalities and the lawsuits, those went to the senior adjusters down the hall. People with 20 years in who knew how to handle the human side of a real catastrophe. I was glad of that. I didn't want the big stuff. I wanted small stuff I could close and forget, because I had enough going on at home. My wife and I had a baby that fall, our first, and she'd had a hard delivery and a harder recovery, and we were underwater in the way new parents get. Money and sleep both running out faster than they came in. I'd taken on overtime I didn't really have the energy for. I was the only income while she healed. And the insurance job didn't pay much, and we were one bad month from trouble. I tell you this not to excuse anything, but because it's the reason I was at my desk at 7 in the evening on a Tuesday in February, alone on my floor, long after everyone else had gone home, clearing the backlog for the overtime rate. That's the only reason the file reached me. If I'd gone home at 5 like a sane man, it would have routed to someone else. Someone senior, someone who maybe knew what to do with it. But I was there, and the queue was thin that late, and the system did what systems do, which is find the nearest available hands. The file came in at 7:14. I remember the time because the timestamp was wrong, and the wrong timestamp was the first thing about it that bothered me. In the small, reflexive way, a wrong number bothers anyone who works with numbers all day. The claim was logged as received at 7:14 p.m., which was that minute, fine. But the date of loss, the date the bad thing supposedly happened, was 3 days in the future. I figured it was a typo. People fat-finger dates all the time. I'd seen claims with dates of loss in 1925 because somebody held down a key. So I didn't think much of it. What did make me sit up was the rest of the file, because it wasn't a fender bender or a flooded basement. It was a fatality, a house fire with one fatality, and it was flagged in the system with a designation I'd never seen, a little red tag in the corner of the file that just said emergency priority handling, and under that, in a field I didn't even know our software had, the words do not assign. Route to desk 1. I want to explain why that was strange, beyond just being strange. Our files don't get assigned by a person. They get assigned by the queue, automatically, by an algorithm nobody at our level understood. And a file marked do not assign should never have appeared in anyone's queue at all. It should have sat in a holding state, invisible, waiting for whatever desk 1 was. and there was no desk 1. I worked there for 2 years. Our desks were numbered. Sure, mine was 34. But the numbering started somewhere in the 20s for the junior pool and went up. I had never heard anyone refer to a desk 1. There was no desk 1 on our floor, or the senior floor, or anywhere I knew of. And yet the file was sitting in my queue. Mine, desk 34, marked "Do Not Assign," and routed to a desk that didn't exist, dated 3 days from now, for a person who, as far as the rest of the world was concerned, was still alive. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. Because what I did is the whole story, really. The small, cowardly choices that pile up. What I did was the correct procedural thing, which is also, I've come to understand, the thing the system wanted me to do. There's a button in our software for misrouted files. It's called Kick Back. You hit it, and the file goes back into the queue with a note, and it routes elsewhere, and it's no longer your problem. That's what you do with a file that isn't yours. And this file was clearly not mine. It was marked not to be assigned to anyone. So I moved my cursor to Kick Back, and I clicked it. Nothing happened. The file stayed on my screen. I clicked it again. The button depressed. I heard the little click of my mouse. But the file didn't move, didn't gray out, didn't do the thing it did 100 times a day when I kicked back a misroute. It just sat there. Emergency priority handling. Do not assign. Route to desk 1. And the cursor, the little spinning wheel that means the system's thinking, came up and spun and spun. And then a small dialog box appeared in the center of my screen. Gray, our software's ugly default style. And it said, "This file cannot be returned. Acknowledge receipt to continue." There was one button. Acknowledge. Now, I want you to understand the position I was in, because it's important you don't think I was being brave or curious. I was tired. It was past 7. I had a sick wife and a newborn at home, and I'd been clearing backlog for 2 hours. And I wanted to leave. And there was a file frozen on my screen that wouldn't go away and was blocking my queue, which meant I couldn't process anything else, which meant I couldn't finish, which meant I couldn't go home and couldn't earn the overtime I was there for. I tried closing the program. It wouldn't close. I tried opening another file. The system wouldn't let me. It kept bouncing me back to the gray box. Acknowledge receipt to continue. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying every way around it I could think of. And finally, because I wanted to go home, because I was annoyed and tired and it was just a button, I clicked acknowledge. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't do it out of heroism or even curiosity. I did it to clear my screen so I could go home. The smallest, most human, most cowardly reason there is. And I've thought a lot since about how that's probably true of everyone who's ever sat where I sat. You don't open the door because you're brave. You open it because it's in your way. The gray box closed. The file opened fully, the way a normal claim does, all its fields populating. And now I could read the whole thing. And reading it is when the tiredness left me and something colder took its place. It was a complete claim file for a house fire that had not happened yet. Date of loss 3 days out, a Friday. An address, a real address, in a residential neighborhood about 20 minutes from our office, a neighborhood I knew vaguely. A policyholder's name. A detailed description of the loss, written in the past tense, the way all claims are written, describing a structure fire that originated in the kitchen, spread to the second floor, that the fire department had responded at such and such a time, that the structure was a total loss, and that one occupant, the policyholder, had not escaped. There was a cause of loss narrative. There was an estimated payout. There was everything a claim has after the adjuster has done weeks of work, except it was all dated for a fire 3 days in the future, for a man who was, presumably, at this moment, sitting in that house alive, watching TV or making dinner, or doing whatever a person does on a Tuesday night, not knowing that an insurance company 20 minutes away already had a finished file on his death. I'll tell you my first real thought, because it's revealing. My first thought wasn't him, the man, the policyholder. My first thought was fraud. Insurance fraud. Somebody inside the company setting up a paper trail for an arson for profit scheme. And I'd stumbled into it working late, and the smart thing, the safe thing, was to know nothing, see nothing, and get out. That's where my mind went first. Not how do I save this man? How do I not get blamed for this? I want you to sit with how ugly that is, because I have to. But the date kept catching me. If this were a fraud setup, why would the file be dated for the future and routed to a desk that didn't exist? Fraud is sloppy in human ways, wrong amounts, forged signatures, not impossible in this clean, systemic way. And the emergency tag, and the do not assign. None of it read like a person had done it. It read like the system had done it. And systems don't commit fraud, systems do what they're built to do. I copied down the address on a post-it. I'm not proud of how my hand shook doing it. And then I did the second cowardly thing, which was that I didn't call anyone, didn't email anyone, didn't flag it up the chain that very night. I told myself it was too late. Everyone was gone. I'd deal with it in the morning. The truth is, I didn't want it to be real. And not telling anyone let it stay not real a little longer. I logged out, or tried to. The system logged me out itself, faster than usual. The screen going dark almost before I'd finished the command. And in the half second before it went black, I saw the file one more time, and the emergency tag had changed. It now reads, Emergency Receipt. Acknowledged. Desk 34. My desk, my number. It had my number on it now. I'd acknowledged receipt. And the file that was never supposed to be assigned to anyone was now, according to the system, mine. I went home. My wife was up with the baby, exhausted, and I didn't tell her anything because what would I have said? And I lay awake most of the night doing the thing I do, which is build explanations. I decided on a test environment. Our company must run test files through the live system sometimes. Dummy claims to check the software, and somebody had built an elaborate test claim, future dated, fake address, fake fatality, to stress test some new emergency handling feature. And it had leaked into my queue by mistake. That held together. That let me sleep, eventually. A test file. Nothing real. I'd report the glitch in the morning, and it would be somebody's job to figure out. And not mine. The address on the post-it was real, though. I checked it on my phone at 2 a.m. while the baby fed, just to confirm it was fake. And it wasn't fake. It was a real house. I could see it on the map. A modest 2-story on a street called Aldous Court. And the property records that came up attached a name to it. And the name matched the policyholder name on the file. That was harder to explain with the test file theory. A test file wouldn't use a real address and a real owner's real name. But I was tired, and I wanted to sleep. So I decided the test designers had just grabbed a real address for realism, which people do, and I put the phone down, and I did sleep, badly. In the morning, I went in early, and I did report it, sort of. I want partial credit for that, even though I know partial credit isn't a thing when somebody's life is involved. I went to my supervisor, a decent enough woman named Carol Petrazzi, who'd been there 15 years, and I told her a misrouted file had frozen in my queue the night before, a weird one, marked emergency, and routed to some desk 1. And I asked her what desk 1 was and whether we ran test files through live. I watched her face while I said it, the way you watch a face, and her face did something I've thought about ever since. It didn't go confused, the way a face goes when it doesn't know what you're talking about. It went still, careful, the face of someone who knows exactly what you're talking about and is deciding how to respond. She asked me if I'd acknowledged it. I said I'd had to clear my screen. And she nodded slowly, and she said, "Okay, don't worry about it. Those come through sometimes. It'll resolve itself. Just don't action it, don't touch it again. And if it shows back up in your queue, leave it. Somebody handles those." And she started to turn back to her monitor. And I said, Who handles those? What's desk 1? And she said without looking at me, "It's above our level. Leave it alone and it'll route where it goes." And that was it. She wouldn't say more. I stood there a second and then went back to my desk, and I told myself her answer was a relief. Somebody handles those, above our level, not my problem, exactly what I wanted to hear. But it wasn't a relief, not really, because somebody handling those is not what you say about a software glitch or a test file. It's what you say about a thing that recurs, a known thing, a thing with a procedure, and the procedure was to leave it alone. The file did show back up in my queue. That afternoon around 4, there it was. Emergency receipt, acknowledged desk 34, sitting at the top. And I did what Carol said. I left it, I didn't touch it, I worked around it all afternoon, processing my fender benders and my flooded basements with that thing sitting at the top of my list like a held breath. And every so often, I'd glance at it. And I want to tell you about the small change I noticed around 5, because it's when the test file theory finally died for good. The file's description has been updated. The narrative of the loss, the part written in past tense describing the fire and the fatality, had a field at the bottom for status, and that field had changed since the night before. The night before, it had said, like a finished claim closed paid. Now it said something else. It said pending. 2 days to loss. There was a countdown. The file knew today's date, and it knew the date of loss, and it was counting down the days between. And it had ticked from 3 to 2. And a closed and paid claim doesn't reopen itself and start counting down to the loss it already paid out on. Files don't run backward, but this one was, ticking toward an event in the past tense that hadn't happened yet. And I sat at my desk on the beige carpet under the humming lights, and I understood, finally, in my body before my mind would say it, that this was not a glitch and not a test and not fraud, and that there was a man on Aldous Court with 2 days to live, according to a document that had my desk number on it. I should have called the man. That was the obvious thing, the human thing. I had his address. I could have found his phone number. His policy listed it. I could have just picked up the phone and called a stranger and said something, anything. Get out of your house, check your smoke detectors, leave town for the weekend, anything. And I want to walk you through exactly why I didn't. Because the why is the part that still keeps me up. I didn't believe it. That's the first reason, and it's the honest one. Even sitting there with the countdown in front of me, the rational part of me, the part that had spent 2 years and a whole life reaching for ordinary explanations, refused to fully accept that a claim file could predict a death. If I called that man and told him his house was going to burn down Friday because my work computer said so, I'd sound insane. He'd hang up. He might call the company and report a deranged employee harassing policyholders. And I'd be fired. And I could not be fired. Not with a sick wife and a newborn and no savings. The fear of being blamed, of losing the income we couldn't lose, was louder in me than the fear that a man might die. Because the man dying was abstract and 3 days out, and probably not even real. And losing my job was concrete and immediate. That's the arithmetic I did. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you, it's the arithmetic. And I suspect it's the arithmetic the system counts on, the same way it counted on me clicking acknowledge just to go home. So I didn't call him that day. I went home. And that night, again, I built a different wall, a worse one, a more selfish one. I decided that Carol had told me somebody handles those, that it was above my level. And that meant there was a process, a real process, people whose actual job this was, the mysterious Desk One, and that those people were already on it, already doing whatever needed doing for the man on Aldous Court, and that the best and safest thing I could do was stay out of the way of professionals who understood this when I didn't. Do you see how good that wall was? It let me do nothing, and feel like doing nothing was the responsible choice. It let me hand the man's life to a desk I'd never seen, and a procedure I couldn't name, and go to sleep next to my wife. And I did sleep. I'm ashamed to say I slept better that second night than the first, because I'd convinced myself it was handled. The next morning, the day before the date of loss, pending, one day to loss, I came in and I couldn't help myself. I started looking into Desk One, not to action the file, just to confirm my comforting story, that there were people on it. I looked through our internal directory, the company org chart, and the desk numbering. There was no Desk One listed anywhere. The desks started at 11. I asked a couple of the senior adjusters casually, "Hey, dumb question. Is there a Desk One? Where do the real emergency files go?" Most of them gave me a blank look, genuinely didn't know, which meant whatever this was, it wasn't common knowledge even among the veterans. But one of them, an older man named Reuben who'd been there longer than anyone, the kind of man who'd seen everything and said little, he didn't give me a blank look. He gave me the same, still, careful look Carol had given me, and he asked me, quietly, why I was asking. And I said I'd gotten a misrouted emergency file, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You acknowledged it, didn't you? You shouldn't have acknowledged it." And I said I'd had to clear my screen, the same thing I'd told Carol. And Reuben shook his head slowly and said something I didn't understand then, and understand too well now. He said, "That's how they get you to take it. They freeze your screen so you'll acknowledge just to go home. Nobody takes one of those on purpose. You take it because it's late and you want to leave." He looked at me. "It's yours now. You acknowledged. Desk One isn't a place, son. Desk One is whoever acknowledges. There's only ever one Desk One at a time, and right now, it's you." I asked him what that meant. I asked him what I was supposed to do. Reuben looked at me for a long moment. An old man deciding how much to tell a young one. And he didn't tell me the whole thing. He never did. But he told me enough to take the last wall down. And he said it low, so the floor wouldn't hear. He said, "It means in 2 days, you're going to have a choice you don't want. And whatever the file's already got written in it is what's going to happen unless the person it's about does something different. And the only one who can warn them is the one whose desk it's on, which is you. And if you warn them, the file doesn't just go away. It finds somewhere else to land. It always lands. The question they don't tell you, the question that's actually your job now, whether you want it or not, is whether you can live with where it lands when you push it off the man on Aldous Court." He turned back to his screen. "Go look at your file again. Look at the bottom field, the one nobody reads. Then come find me, and I'll tell you the part Carol won't." I went back to my desk. The file was there, pending, 1 day to loss. And I scrolled down, all the way to the bottom, past every field I'd already read a dozen times, to a field at the very bottom in small gray text that I'd never scrolled far enough to see. A field labeled Contingent Reassignment. And in it, populated, ready, waiting, was a second address, a second name, the place the file would land if I pushed it off the man on Aldous Court. And I read the name in that field. And I read the address, and I had to grip the edge of my desk, because the address in the Contingent Reassignment field was my address, and the name was my wife's. I went and found Reuben, and I think my face told him what I'd seen before I said a word, because he didn't make me explain. He took me to the stairwell, the concrete one nobody used because the elevator was faster. And we stood on the landing between floors, where the only sound was the building's ventilation. And he told me the part Carol wouldn't. But first he corrected me, and the correction is the whole thing, so I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me. I said, the file says it'll land on my wife if I push it off the man, so I just won't push it. I'll leave it on Aldous Court. I'll do nothing. And Reuben looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity, more like recognition. The look of a man watching someone else make the mistake he'd made. And he said, that's not the choice. You think the choice is between the man and your wife. It isn't. Listen to me. The contingent field isn't a threat. It's the default. That's not where it lands if you push it off. That's where it lands if you do nothing. I didn't understand. I said so. The file's assigned to you now, he said. Desk 1, whoever acknowledges. Once it's yours, it has to resolve through you. And there's only 2 ways it resolves. Either the loss happens as written, to the name in the main field, the man on Aldous Court, and the file closes and pays, and you're done. Or it doesn't happen to him, because somebody changed it, because he got warned, because the chain broke somehow, and then it has to go to the contingent. The loss still happens. It always happens. The file is a loss that's already real, it just hasn't picked who yet. The main field is who it'll be if you let it run. The contingent is who it'll be if you stop it. He paused. And the system fills the contingent field with whoever the holder loves most. It's not random. It read you. It puts your wife there because that's who you'd least want it to be. That's the leash. That's how it makes sure you don't interfere. You leave the man on Aldous Court to burn, or you save him and it comes home to your house. Doing nothing isn't neutral. Doing nothing is choosing him. There's no version where nobody pays. I want to tell you I argued. I want to tell you I said, that's monstrous. We have to break it. There has to be a way. The things you say in your head when you imagine being in a situation like this. I didn't say any of that. What I actually said, standing in that stairwell, was, how do I make sure it stays on him? That was my first real question. Not how do I save everyone? How do I make sure the stranger dies and my family doesn't? I heard it come out of my mouth, and I was ashamed of it. And I asked it anyway, because that's who I am. I told you that at the start. And Reuben heard it too, and he didn't judge me for it, because he'd asked the same question once. You don't have to make sure of anything, he said. That's the awful part. The default does it for you. You just leave it alone. You let the days run out. The file resolves to the main field, the man on Aldous Court, and it closes, and your house is fine, and you never have to lift a finger. Doing nothing is how you save your family. That's why it's so easy. That's why it almost always lands where it's written. Because the only people who ever divert one of these are the ones who can't live with letting a stranger die. And the price of not being able to live with it is that it comes for someone they love instead. So they pay it, or they don't. And most of them don't. Most of us don't. He looked at his hands. I've held 4. I let all 4 run. 4 strangers I could have warned and didn't, because the contingent field had my wife's name, then my daughter's, then my wife's again, then my grandson's. 4 people are dead who didn't have to be, and my family's alive. And I come to work every day and process fender benders. And that's the job. The real job. Not the one in the handbook. I asked him who built it, the system, where it came from, what it was, why an insurance company. And Reuben gave me the only answer he had, which was no answer, and which I've come to think is the truest thing anyone said to me through all of this. He said, I don't know. Nobody knows. It was here before Carol, before me. It's not the company exactly. The company's just the shape it wears, the way it gets its paperwork done. Losses happen. People die in fires and crashes and falls. They always have. And somewhere there's a thing that decides the particulars, the who and the when. And at some point a long time ago, that thing learned to use a claims system to do its bookkeeping. Because a claims system is already a machine for turning a death into a number and a number into a payment. We're not adjusting claims. We're the part of it that picks. Every adjuster who's ever let a file run as written has been picked. We just get to pretend we didn't, because all we did was nothing. That landed on me hard, the way true things do, because it took away the last wall, the do-nothing is neutral wall, the one I'd slept so well behind 2 nights running. Doing nothing wasn't staying out of it. Doing nothing was the choosing. Every quiet adjuster at every beige desk who'd ever let one of these run out was a person who'd looked at a stranger's name and their own loved one's name and chose the stranger by doing exactly nothing and gone home and slept. The system didn't need villains. It needed cowards, ordinary ones, people with sick wives and new babies and overtime to earn, people who'd choose their own the way anyone would, the way I was already in that stairwell, deciding to. Because I'll be honest with you about what I decided in that stairwell, before I decided anything else, before any of the rest of it. I decided I was going to let the man on Alda's court burn. I decided it fast, and I decided it with my whole body, and I didn't even have to think hard, which is the part I have to live with. The math was instant. A stranger I'd never met. 3 days ago, I didn't know he existed. Against my wife, who was upstairs in our bed, healing from a delivery that nearly killed her. With our daughter in the bassinet beside her. There was no contest. There was never going to be a contest. I'd have let 100 strangers burn. I think most people would. And I think the ones who say they wouldn't have never had the name of the person they love most sitting in a gray field at the bottom of a form, waiting. So that's where I was. Day before the loss, decision made. The cowardly decision, the one the system was built to extract from me. And I'd have left it there, I think. And this would be a story about a man who did nothing and got to keep his family and carries it quietly forever, which is most of these stories. Except for 2 things that happened that last day. And they're the reason I'm telling you any of this. Because they're the reason the cowardly choice didn't stay clean. The reason there's no version of me that gets to feel like I just protected my family. The first thing was that I looked the man up. The one on Alda's court. I'd had his name for 3 days, and I'd been careful not to make him a person. Because you can let a name burn, but it's harder to let a person burn. And some bad instinct in me, or maybe a good one, finally waking up too late, made me search his name properly that afternoon. And he was a person. Of course he was. He was 61. He'd been a high school shop teacher for 30 years, retired now. There was a little article from a few years back, a local thing, about him repairing donated bikes for kids who couldn't afford them. A photo of him in a garage surrounded by bicycle frames, squinting at the camera, a big, tired, kind face. He lived alone. His wife had died of cancer 4 years before. He had no children. He fixed bikes for poor kids in his garage, and he lived alone in the house that was going to burn. And the fire, the file said, started in the kitchen. And I sat at my desk, and I looked at that tired, kind face, and I understood that I was going to let him die, to keep my family safe, and that knowing his face wasn't going to change my decision. It was just going to make the decision cost more. And I was furious at myself for looking. Because the not looking had been the only mercy I had left, I'd thrown it away. The second thing was Carol. Late that afternoon, Carol came to my desk, which she never did, and she stood close and spoke low, and she said, "You went to Reuben." Not a question. I said yes. And she nodded, and she said, "Then you know." So I'll tell you the rest of what I know, because Reuben's a good man, but he's tired and he stopped looking for the door, and I haven't, not all the way. She glanced at my screen, at the file, pending, 1 day to loss. He told you there's 2 ways it resolves, main field or contingent. That's true. But there's a third thing, and it's not a way out. I want to be clear, it's not a happy ending. But it's a thing, and you should know it before tomorrow. She lowered her voice further. The holder can take it himself. You can put your own name in the contingent field. It'll let you. It's the one edit it allows, because it's the one edit that still gives it a loss. If you do that, the man on Aldous Court lives, your wife lives, and the file resolves to you. You become a loss. She straightened up. I'm not telling you to. God knows I never did. I'm telling you so that when you choose to do nothing, and you will, you know exactly what you're choosing not to do. That's the only honesty this job allows. You don't get to feel trapped. You get to know there was a door and you didn't take it. That's worse, but it's true. And you deserve the truth more than you deserve to feel trapped. And she went back to her office. And I sat there with 3 options now instead of 2. And the third one was so much worse than no option at all. I went home that night, and I looked at my wife and my daughter for a long time. My wife was finally sleeping well, the first good night she'd had in weeks, and the baby was down, and the house was quiet and warm and ours. And I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, and I thought about the man on Aldous Court alone, in his house fixing bikes. And I thought about Carol's third door, my own name in the grave field. And I thought about my daughter growing up without a father to save a stranger I'd never met. And I made my decision again. The same decision, do nothing, let it run, keep my family. And I made it standing in that doorway, looking at them. And I want you to know, it was the easiest hard decision I've ever made. It wasn't even close. And that's the thing about me I most wish weren't true. But I didn't sleep. Decision made. Family safe. And I didn't sleep, because the man's face was in the dark every time I closed my eyes. The squinting, tired, kind face in the garage full of bikes. And around 3 in the morning, with the baby feeding and my wife asleep, I did the one thing I'd sworn I wouldn't. The thing that ruined the clean version of my cowardice forever. I called him. I had his number off the policy. I sat in the dark kitchen and I called the man on Aldous Court at 3 in the morning, and he answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep and fear the way anyone's is at 3 a.m. Hello, hello, who is this? And I sat there with the phone to my ear, and I could not speak. I had called to warn him. Some part of me, the part that had looked up his face, had made me dial, had overridden the decision, and then the rest of me, the bigger part, the part that had my wife's name in the gray field burned into it, clamped my throat shut, because warning him meant diverting the file, and diverting the file meant it went to the contingent. meant it came home. And I could not, even with his frightened voice in my ear saying, "Hello. Is someone there, please? Who is this?" I could not make myself say the words that would move the loss from his house to mine. I sat there in the dark, and I listened to a man I was going to let die to ask me who I was. And I said nothing. And after a while, he said in a smaller voice, "Is somebody there? I can hear you breathing." And I hung up. That's the call I can't take back. Not the silence, the call. Because the silence I could have lived with was cowardice, as a thing I failed to do. But I called. I dialed his number on purpose at 3 a.m, which means some part of me wanted to save him. Tried to, got that far. And then I choked, which is so much worse than never trying. Because it means I knew. It means it wasn't ignorance or disbelief or any of the walls I'd built. By 3 a.m, I believed it completely. I believed it enough to call. And I let him die anyway. With the means to save him in my hand and his voice in my ear. Because the price was my family, and I wasn't willing to pay it. I want to be a man who'd pay for it. I called him because I wanted to be that man. And then I found out I wasn't in real time with him listening to me breathe. The fire was on Friday. I know because I made myself watch for it. Refreshing local news on my phone all day at my desk, the file in front of me ticking from pending. One day to loss, to that morning, pending today. The past tense narrative right there describing the fire that hadn't started yet. The kitchen origin, the spread to the second floor, the response time, the single fatality. And in the early evening, the local news posted it. A house fire on Aldous Court. One person, a retired man, did not escape. Investigators believed it started in the kitchen, possibly a stove left on. A neighbor was quoted saying he was a good man, fixed bikes for kids, kept to himself since his wife passed. The fire department's response time, when they posted it later, matched the file to the minute. Everything matched the file. Because the file wasn't a prediction. I understood that now. It was a record, written ahead of time. And my job had been to decide whether to let it be true. And I had let it be true. By doing nothing, and then by calling and saying nothing, which is worse than nothing. The file on my screen updated itself as the news came in. Pending today became, while I watched, claim closed paid, and the emergency receipt acknowledged desk 34 tag cleared. The file grayed out, archived, resolved, gone from the top of my queue. Just another closed claim in the system and the contingent field. When I scrolled down to it with my heart going, was empty, blank. My wife's name was gone from it, because it hadn't been needed, because I'd let the main field run, because I'd chosen exactly the way the system was built to make me choose. My family was safe. The man was dead. The file was closed. I had done my job, the real job, the one Reuben described, and I had done it perfectly, which is to say, I had done nothing. Twice, the second time with his voice in my ear. I thought that was the end of it. I thought, this is the quiet version, the version Reuben lives in. You let one run and you carry it and you go on. I went home and I held my daughter and I didn't tell my wife. And I started learning to live with the man on Aldous Court the way Reuben lived with his 4. I even, God help me, felt the relief under the guilt, the animal relief that my family was safe. And I hated the relief, and I felt it anyway, because that's how it works. You feel the relief whether you want to or not. That's the wage the system pays you for picking. A little involuntary relief that makes you complicit in your own gut. Here's the part I've told no one until now. The reason I'm finally saying any of this. The thing that took the quiet version away from me. The Monday after the fire, a new file came into my queue. Not emergency tagged, not frozen, just a normal file, routed the normal way, sitting in my queue with all my other small claims, and I almost processed it without looking, the way you do. And then I saw the name on it, and I stopped. It was a claim filed by the estate of the man on Aldous Court, a standard fire claim, the kind I process every day. Total loss of structure, fatality, the payout going to his estate since he had no heirs, eventually to the city or the state, or wherever money goes when a man dies alone. A completely ordinary claim. And it had routed to me. To desk 34. Out of all the adjusters, the system had sent the dead man's actual, real, after-the-fact insurance claim to me. The one whose desk number was on the file that killed him. And I understood that this was not a coincidence, that the system was not done with me, that having made me desk 1 once it had marked me, the way Reuben was marked, the way Carol was marked, and that the dead man's claim coming to my desk was the system's way of closing the loop, of making me the one who paid out on the death I'd allowed, of making me sign the number at the bottom and route the payment, so that there would be no part of his death I hadn't handled. I processed it. Of course I did. What was I going to do? Refuse? Draw attention? Explain to Carol I couldn't process a fire claim because I'd let the man die? I verified the details, which all matched, because I'd read them 3 days before the fire. I assigned the value, which matched the estimate that had been in the future dated file. I routed the payment. I closed the claim. I did my job, my normal job, on the death I'd caused. And the system let me, smoothly, with no frozen screens and no gray boxes, because it didn't need to coerce me anymore. I was already there. I'd acknowledged once, and that was all it ever needed. And then the last thing, the thing that's why I can't sleep. The thing that means it isn't over, and won't be. A week after I closed the man's claim, I was clearing the late backlog again. Alone on the floor again. Because the money's still tight, the baby's still not sleeping. Life didn't stop just because I let a man die. And a file came into my queue at 7:14 in the evening. At the same time, emergency priority handling. Do not assign. Route to desk 1. Date of loss 3 days out. A different address, a different name, a different stranger, somewhere across town. And I moved my cursor to kick back the way you do, knowing it wouldn't work. And it didn't. And the gray box came up. This file cannot be returned. Acknowledge receipt to continue. 1 button, acknowledge. And I understood that this is the job now. That Reuben held 4 over a career, and that the system had decided I was efficient. That I'd resolved my first one perfectly. No fuss, let it run. Paid it out. That I was good at this. That being a coward with a family to protect makes you very, very good at this. And that the files would keep coming to me at 7:14 for as long as I sat at this desk, each one a stranger, each one with a name in the contingent field that I'd recognize, that I'd choose against, by doing nothing, again and again, and going home to the family I chose them all to protect. I didn't acknowledge it right away this time. I sat there a long time, the gray box on my screen, the building quiet, the fluorescents humming. And I thought about Carol's 3rd door, my own name in the contingent field, the edit it allows, the loss that lands on me and saves everyone. I thought about it the way you think about a high ledge, knowing you won't jump and hating that you know it. And then I thought about my daughter, who started smiling now, who smiled at me that very morning. And I clicked acknowledge to clear my screen, so I could finish my backlog and go home to her. The smallest, most human, most cowardly reason there is. The same reason as the first time. The only reason there's ever been. The files open in front of me as I tell you this. Pending. 2 days to loss. I haven't looked up the name yet. I've learned not to look up the name. That's the one mercy I've taught myself. You don't look up the face. You let it stay a name. A name is easier to do nothing to. I haven't scrolled down to the contingent field either because I know whose name is in it. It's always the same now. She's the one I love most, and the system knows it. And in 2 days, I'll do nothing. The way I always do, the way the job requires. And a stranger across town will die in whatever way the file's already written. And my family will be safe. And I'll process the real claim when it comes to my desk the following week. And close the loop and go on. I'm telling you this not because I want absolution. There isn't any, and not as a warning, because there's nothing to warn you to do. The whole horror is that there's nothing to do. The system doesn't ask you to act. It asks you to refrain. And refraining is the easiest thing in the world when the alternative is someone you love. I'm telling you because I need one person to know that the quiet adjusters at the quiet desks, the ones processing your fire claim and your crash claim with their tired, kind faces, some of us aren't just adjusting the loss. Some of us picked it. And we did it by doing nothing, which is why you'll never be able to tell which of us, and why we get to keep coming to work, and keep our families, and keep our hands clean enough to keep clicking, file after file, at 7:14, acknowledging, so we can go home. It's 7:31 now. The file's still open. In a minute, I'll close out my queue and drive home and kiss my daughter and not look up the name. There's a man or a woman across town, 2 days from now, who has no idea, the way the bike teacher had no idea, the way you have no idea. Sitting wherever you are, whether your name has ever been in a gray field at the bottom of a form, waiting for someone tired at a beige desk to do nothing. Mine has been, I'd guess, more than once. Yours too. That's not a threat, it's just arithmetic. Somebody's always at the desk. Right now it's me, and I'm sorry, and I'm going home.